This meeting is being recorded.
Harshit, I'll just send it on email to all of them. Just give me a second.
Hello, good evening, everyone. Please allow us a couple of minutes. We'll be starting the webinar today at 4:30.
Vishu, Swapnil, it's already in your mailbox. Harshit has already sent it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I received it.
I think Vinay just joined in too.
Yes. Hi, good evening, everyone. This is Harshit Podar here from Safer. Firstly, I'd like to welcome everyone attending this webinar today, where we look at the union budget and see how it's going to be impacting the energy industry. Joining us today, we have our esteemed panel from Vibrant Energy. We have Mr. Vinay Pabba from Indian Energy Exchange. We have Mr. Vishu Vishal, and from Ecofy, we have Mr. Swapnil. And we would be here, each of our panelists sits at a very unique vantage point in the entire power sector at large. And I can't wait to hear their views on this budget. Now, without much ado, let me first introduce our panelists to you. So, Mr. Vinay Pabba, he's the CEO of Vibrant Energy. Mr. Pabba is a trailblazer in the renewable energy sector, and his company has now deployed over 4,000 megawatts of distributed solar and wind power, which is saving over 2 million tons of CO2 emissions per year. He has also extended his leadership in launching Brookfield Asset Management in India. And Mr. Pabba is actually also a former IRS officer, giving him a very detailed insight into the budget and into the revenue functions of the government. Welcome, Vinay. At the same time, we also have Mr. Swapnil Wakade from Ecofy, where he heads the solar finance division. Now, there has been a lot of changes happening, particularly in residential solar. And from Ecofy, Swapnil sits at a very interesting vantage point wherein he can monitor the entire industry, especially the residential solar market and the emerging SME solar market very intensively. Prior to joining Ecofy, Swapnil was heading distributed solar business unit at Mahindra Teco, wherein he was managing a rooftop solar portfolio spread across India. We're hoping to hear more from Swapnil on the particular impacts in terms of residential solar. And last but not the least, we have Mr. Vishu Vishal, who's a senior manager for energy strategy at IEX. Now, Indian Energy Exchange is at the forefront of the entire energy industry of the country, and this budget has had a dramatic impact in the overall energy infrastructure of the country. So we're looking forward to hear from Mr. Vishu Vishal more about his views on this. Mr. Vishal is a dynamic energy professional who works at IEX. He's looking after key sectors such as electric vehicles, green hydrogen, and energy storage. So all of these sectors are newer sectors that have been impacted largely through budgets, and so we'd love to hear his views on this. Now, what to expect from this call today? So we need to deep dive into every single aspect of the budget that impacts the energy industry. We're going to keep the conversation specific towards energy industry in large and see how it impacts various facets of the energy industry. Now, before I pass on the baton to our esteemed panelists, let me first look at what are the key highlights of the budget. Now, we've classified them into essentially five categories. The first is, of course, the deployment in residential solar is bound to accelerate. There has been a huge boost to that. Secondly, there's actually been an allocation for R&D of solar modules and newer solar technologies. As some of you may remember from our previous call, this was an explicit ask of the industry last year, and in this year, there's the government of India for the first time has allocated a specific budget for R&D of the solar panels in India, especially with a focus towards R&D of newer technologies. So that should be quite interesting. We're also seeing a holistic investment in infrastructure. This is bound to boost the industry by large for years to come. There is a lot of talks of new investments happening in distribution of power as well as in solar parks. So would love to dive deeper into this. We're also seeing a continued push by India to become a leader in module production. Now, as you may recall, about 3 years back, the government of India first launched a PLI for solar module manufacturing, and that has had a profound impact in the country's module production capacities. In fact, which now stands at roughly about 70 gigawatts, which is approximately 2x the domestic market. So we've seen this push continue, and this is a very major strategic call by the government to become extremely self-reliant on solar module manufacturing. And lastly, we're seeing a reduction in duties and tax obligations, primarily for renewable energy investments. Let us also look at a few key data points that were declared in the budget. So firstly, there's been an 80% increase in the total outlay towards the PM Surya Ghar Yojana. In fact, it's now called PM Surya Ghar Yojana 2.0, but the aim remains the same to essentially electrify 1 crore homes in the country through with a focus towards electrifying lower income households. So the total outlay towards this is projected at rupees 20,000 crores. We also saw an extension of the PLI scheme with an increased outlay of rupees 24,000 crores for solar module manufacturing and a 2,000 crore rupee outlay for green hydrogen development. At the same time, we saw an R&D budget of 1,500 crores with investments into newer module technologies such as perovskite cells, etc. Additionally, the grid infrastructure is being modernized with an investment of 5,000 crores. And as someone working in the renewable energy industry, this is something that that we've been waiting for, we've been asking for years, and glad to see that we're looking at grid modernization now at scale. Additionally, the government is also proposing to establish green energy corridors with an investment of rupees 600 crores. And the subsidy for residential solar is now at 40%. There is also a 5-year tax holidays for solar developers. Additionally, solar with accelerated depreciation benefits, the tax structure on newer solar projects make these projects a lot more viable. So this is a broad outlay into what into the budget, into the key figures that impact the budget. Now I would love to hear from our panelists what their views on the budget has been. So let's start with you, Vinay. Over to you. Please do give us a synopsis of your views on the budget and how that is going to impact the energy sector for years to come. Vinay, you're muted.
Okay. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Thank you, Harshit. It's an honor and a privilege to be here on the panel. Thank you, Safer. Thank you for the entire team for organizing this. Quite a topical subject and focused on energy transition, especially on climate change themes. It's unique in a way among the many
yes, sorry, please continue.
many conferences and many think tanks have been analyzing this. I think this is very, very topical. And again, thanks for having me.
Thank you.
Just getting into the overall themes, I would like to kind of put this in the larger context of energy transition and how the budget is impacting energy transition. Most of the things have been captured by Harshit, and just wanted to bring out a few of the themes that have a direct bearing on solar, wind, and all the other technologies that are a fundamental and crucial part of the energy transition that we are seeing today. I think one of the things that a big commitment in terms of funding availability and articulation of a goal is on the nuclear energy mission for the Vikasit Bharat. The stated goal is to do about 100 gigawatts of nuclear energy by 2047, and the government is backing it up by amendments to the Atomic Energy Act and the Civil Liability Nuclear Damage Act. I think these are very, very transformative amendments that we're going to expect, which will allow a larger play for the private sector and actually scaling up of nuclear capacity. And what Harshit probably forgot to mention is the 20,000 crore budget set aside to support SMRs, small modular reactors, targeting at least 5 SMRs to be operational by 2033. That's one thing that I would really keenly watch out for, and hope that the amendments to the legislations will actually incentivize more private sector involvement and actually get to commission the kind of capacity targets that being articulated here. The second most, I think for me, the most important thing was the clear mention of power sector reforms and incentives for intrastate transmission capacity augmentation. Harshit referred to it briefly, but one thing that the budget does is it allows the states an additional borrowing of up to 0.5% of the state GDP, contingent on implementing these reforms, and which means that the ability of the states to borrow money increases if they implement these reforms. I would want to watch out for that space. On solar energy, in terms of duty structure, the changes have been very marginal. The 40% rate actually continues effectively, though optically it has been reduced to 20%, but again, solar modules have been brought under a separate levy called the AIDC, it's the Agricultural and Infra Development cess. So while you have reduced it to 20% under the customs tariff, you again restored it back to 40% by imposing an AIDC of 20%. The only net effect in terms of a net reduction in the customs duties has been on the social welfare surcharge, which was earlier at 4%. That goes away now. Effectively, there's a very marginal reduction on solar photovoltaic SP modules. On the cell side, which was what we were keenly watching, was and then it came out that from the earlier 25%, there's a marginal increase if you were to read the customs duties and the AIDC put together. So that goes up to about 27.5%. It would not be out of place to mention that there is on battery storage and EV ecosystems, there is quite a few duty exemptions on capital goods for the EV industry. That is bound to reduce import dependency and incentivize local manufacturing. There are other things on critical minerals, mining sector reforms, which have an indirect bearing on the energy transition that we have, especially the full exemption on BCD on 25 critical raw materials that are not domestically available is bound to increase availability of these raw materials to incentivize battery production in India. I would pause there. These are the main things that I carry from what the budget says on energy transition, basically on the nuclear energy mission, power sector reforms, marginal changes to solar energy and battery storage, incentives for capital goods import for lithium-ion battery manufacturing and EVs, and the whole piece on full exemption of BCD for critical minerals that are required for battery manufacture. I would pause there. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Vinay. I can see people have already started asking questions on the nuclear energy, on nuclear energy. Now, for our viewers, let me just inform you that I have just put a link on the chat. This is if there are any questions that you have, you can go in on Slido, ask those questions, and there are already a bunch of questions that people have asked. If there are any particular topics that you'd like for our panelists to cover, please do upvote onto questions, and we will definitely be tackling all of the questions that receive the maximum upvotes. So now, without much ado, let me now move to our next panelist to get their views. Mr. Vishu Vishal, over to you. Please do let us know what you think of the budget. What excites you from this budget?
So first of all, thank you, Harshit, and thank you, Safer team, for organizing this webinar. And it's an interesting discussion because we are in the mid of energy transition, and India is having a very challenging task in terms of taking care of twin responsibility, both in terms of energy security and energy transition. For a country of our size, growing at 6% per year, power demand is there, and at the same time, taking care of energy transition is a very momentous task. So, with all those things in mind, I think few elements of the budget which Vinay has already talked about. So, without repeating that, I would comment on two, three important aspects which I feel would be important. See, the most important issue that sector is grappling with is the operational efficiency of discoms. Now, there was RDSS scheme which was implemented from FY22, and that has led to some improvement in terms of AT&C losses through installation of smart meters and discom modernization. So I think continuing that thing forward, linking that 0.5% additional borrowing is something that should incentivize states, especially to accelerate the reforms and especially modernization of discoms by installation of smart meters. That should give a lot of room to state government to do capex on other development activities. And having a thriving and viable discom is in the interest of power sector, and also is required for energy transition. So that's one important aspect that I'm hopeful that should help sector at large. The other important aspect is, of course, the nuclear, because nuclear is going to be game changer. Till date, we were mostly talking about decarbonizing India's power sector through renewable sources plus storage. But nuclear is going to have a game-changing effect in terms of, now there has to be a debate about how much thermal capacity we need, because nuclear is going to be the base load, how much solar and how much storage capacity you are going to need, because nuclear is also a clean fuel, and the reliability component of nuclear is very high. You can definitely have a very high reliability, and the cost of nuclear technology is also going to come down with the research that is going on in small modular reactors right now. So I believe that nuclear will have a very huge impact, and in fact, it could be a good news for India if we want to reduce the emission intensity for power sector, because we can decarbonize the sector faster having nuclear in place. We can even think of pre-retiral of thermal stations, and even we need to rethink on how much new thermal capacity we need, because nuclear would be there in a big way that government is planning right now. And the third important aspect, which also Vinay talked about, is I feel that in India we need to have a strong ecosystem of battery manufacturing. Though we have done a commendable job, as you also mentioned, about solar manufacturing capacities, and we have enough manufacturing capacity for solar as well as wind. But where we are lagging is manufacturing capacity for battery storage system. Now, having a robust ecosystem of battery recycling, which is promoted by the budget in terms of waiver, BCD waiver on importing waste battery, I think that should incentivize development of ecosystem, and that should reduce the cost of harnessing lithium from waste battery, and maybe we can use that battery either in the stationary applications in power systems, and also in EV ecosystem. So I think these three would be key takeaways, and more to discuss. So I would pause here, and we'll discuss as we go ahead.
Thank you, sir. In fact, this is something that absolutely seems really interesting. I mean, currently, coal accounts about 60% of India's energy mix, and nuclear just accounts for 1.4%. So we're talking of a complete platonic shift, and in terms of our energy mix, we'll cover this more in Q&A. But for now, over to you, Swapnil. Would love to hear your views, especially as Mr. Vishal was saying, that we face that dual challenge of not just energy transition, but also energy security. And one of our panelists who's working extremely hard in energy security. So how does this, I mean, how do you see this budget primarily from the energy security and electrification standpoint?
Yeah, hi Archit. First of all, thanks a lot for giving this opportunity and having this webinar. I think we are the first one to set up a webinar on the energy segment. Second, I have to pardon you all because I'm traveling, and I told like the team that I'm in Vande Bharat, so there will be a bit of noise, but you please pardon me. And
I can hear you perfectly.
yes. So I will go directly to the point. So first of all, on the residential piece, which was untapped till date, what we have seen is it is growing big and rapidly. So what we have achieved in 9 years of operation, we have achieved in last 1 year. That is a bigger have in the residential, close to 7 lakh of installation in the residential segment, which is directly impacting, creating an impact in the retail segment to the individual house.
Swapnil, sorry, we're losing you. Could you turn off your camera? I think that will help you save some bandwidth.
Yeah. Uh, uh,
I think we have lost him, Harshit.
Yes. Apologies for that. I think we've lost Swapnil he's traveling. Anyways, let us get to and once he does rejoin, I would love to hear his views specifically in context to residential solar. But for now, I want to get back to the point that Vinay and Mr. Vishu Vishal were making, primarily for the nuclear sector. Now, we're talking about replacing 60% of the country's energy mix with an energy source that's currently at about 1.4% of the energy mix. And of course, this is a very major long-term shift. But what are what are your viewpoints in the growing in the growing nuclear energy in the country? I understand that that we're looking at smaller scale reactors, but how do you see nuclear replacing coal eventually?
yeah, I'm sorry, Harshit. I am sorry. I'm back. Yeah.
Yes.
So I will go again to the point. I know I'm really sorry, but yeah, because the residential piece is very very critical and growing. I'm jumping into the because I'm traveling. But what we have seen is the growth. Second, earlier the market was only concentrated in Gujarat. All across. So it is spread all across, and all states have started contributing into it. There are a lot of manufacturers who are coming in. And yes, as a financier, we are conscious about the new manufacturers because initially there are very few manufacturers, like few inverter manufacturers and module manufacturers. Now, let's say, they're lined up. We are a bit worried on the warranty support and the serviceability. So we are cautious while onboarding the OEM on our platform, the Ecofy platform, or all other financials are cautious while onboarding an OEM onto the platform. So yeah, this is about the PM Suryagar scheme. Yeah. Thanks, Arshan.
In fact, this is a very valid point. Both the points in terms of Gujarat being the dominant force and other states now catching up. In fact, one thing I'd like to share with our readers: Gujarat still accounts for 46%. 46% of all the residential rooftop installed in the country. So it essentially dwarfs the rest of the country. And Swapnil, since you're working so much with companies from Gujarat, what is really working out there? Is it only a changed customer perspective? Why is Gujarat at 46% and the rest, I mean, the entire other balance of the country is at 54%?
So first of all, there was a Gujarat. So Gujarat was the first state to digitize the solar adoption through the JEDA portal. That is the first thing. So they made it easy. If you want to go for a solar, they made it easy. They removed all the hiccups by launching a platform, which now, like in a way, PM Suryagar is solving. That is first thing. Second thing, there was subsidy scheme in Gujarat, 40% subsidy scheme. So one, they made it easy. Second, there was subsidy, and third, it was voice of the customer. It was a network effect which played in. Means one customer installed a solar, he got benefited from it, he received the subsidy, he told to like 10 other colleagues from his society, and the network effect, and then entire society got solarized, and nearby 4 or 5 societies got solarized. So you can see in coming year, the Gujarat share will start coming down, and other states like of Maharashtra, UP, Kerala, Tamil Nadu will start picking up because the process is easy. There is subsidy, and network effect will come into a picture.
Right. Thank you so much. I actually want to ask Vinay something building upon that. Now you mentioned, Swapnil mentioned that essentially the ease of switching to solar, of getting that subsidy, played a key part in Gujarat's solar transition. And we're now seeing a single window clearance for solar developers, especially for these larger projects. How do you see this impacting project timelines and the number of projects that come up over the next few years?
Are you talking only about rooftops or generally projects?
No, so the single window clearance, I believe, is primarily for large scale utility projects as well as solar parks.
Yeah, so the bigger challenges, Harshit, on the utility scale solar, I'll probably talk about that in
Right.
particular. That's where we have been working. So you have the utility segment and the large mid-size C&I segment, that the big piece of the whole capacities that we commission every year. So there have been, I mean, the bidding paradigm has been very conducive for large-scale rollout of capacity. There's no doubt about that, despite occasional blips of the way in which it has been misused, like in the recent Adani episode. I mean, that aside, I think the bidding paradigm has been a model of success. The kind of integrity it brings in, the kind of transparency it brings in, and the price discovery that it has achieved, I think are unparalleled. And the ability to attract investments, to create an investable paradigm for investments in clean energy in India, I think it's been an unparalleled success. There are very few benchmarks, but it has over a period of time, it has developed a few of the flaws, and these are increasingly becoming apparent now. One is that the chasing the lowest rupees per kilowatt hour has pushed capacities to the solar rich states and the wind rich states, and these are very few in number. So this artificial concentration of capacity to resource rich areas of the country has created two things, two real problems. One is immense pressure on transmission connectivity in this area. So a lot of capacity gets pushed into a very narrow, resource-rich part of the country, and then you have transmission congestion that's happening. And that again, in turn, actually chokes the further build-out capacities. Second thing it has meant is, severe stress on land and connectivity availability in these areas where capacity is getting concentrated. There's a real need to be less, to step off the rupees per kilowatt mindset and then try to use policy to disperse capacity in a slightly more or slightly less warped manner or less skewed manner than it is happening today. The biggest challenges to utility scale rollout remain land, connectivity, and capital. The rest is something that developers will be able to manage, will be able to execute very fast. If you look at the capacity additions that we have been doing, it's typically been between 25 to 30 gigawatts a year on solar, much less on wind. I mean, the wind is some cause for worry. Between the two, we need to do at least 45 to 50 gigawatts if we have to meet at least the incremental demand, which is hitting the grid in terms of power demand growth purely by renewables. I'm not even talking about substituting existing coal or substituting existing fossil fuel based sources. Even if incremental power demand has to be met purely by renewables, that's the number that we need to hit. And we are significantly far away from that. So the ability to add transmission capacity, ability to decongest existing transmission corridors in resource-rich states, and initiatives for making sure that land and connectivity are available, I think are going to go a long way in ability to ramp up capacity installs for renewable energy. Wind is particularly worrisome, like I said. I mean, we have not even crossed the best year that we have had. I think it was in 2014 or so, where we did about 3.5 gigawatts in a year. We're barely doing 2.5 gigawatts even today, with all the incentive structures in place. There's a serious. It's not even the capacity. We have had people leaving the sector. All the big manufacturers are exiting. We have only very few people who are left out. There are supply chain constraints. There are ground issues in actually getting this large big turbines to the site and directing them. There are serious gaps in the ecosystem of vendors who help developers like us to cart the equipment to the site and then actually install it. The severe gaps there. I think all those are industry issues. Probably government may not be able to do much with it, but there are issues outside policy and tariffs which the budget directly addresses, which probably need to be considered. I spoke about a few of them. I could go on, but I think those are the ones that we need to address now to really kind of debottleneck and scale up capacities.
We saw in the last budget an investment into offshore wind. And I think that was the first time India started exploring offshore wind as to grow the wind capacity. And we're seeing offshore wind becoming a sizable energy contributor in Europe, at least. What are your views in terms of offshore wind, especially from an Indian context? And how do you see this space rolling out over the next few years?
We are optimistic about what offshore wind can do. The problem there seems to be a severe limitation on the resource. So, off the Gujarat coast and off the Tamil Nadu coast, which are the only two areas where you can even think of that, I am given to understand that the capacity factors that you can achieve are not that great. So, there's an inherent question mark on the project viabilities at those CUFs. So the government has stepped in with a viability gap funding for the first round of projects. It would be interesting to see how that takes off in terms of the tariffs we discover after factoring in the VGF. But reliance on VGF is not really a thing that we can do in the long term. The rates that are discovered and rates that offshore wind can deliver, cost at which they can deliver power to the grid, has to be reasonable and something that the discoms can buy. See, at the end of the day, energy has to be clean, it has to be affordable, it has to be reliable. Solar does that. It ticks the box of sustainability and affordability. Both solar and wind do not tick the reliability box. They are intermittent. So there's a need for addition of other technologies to make it more reliable and less intermittent. But if you have a source of technology that kind of takes you past the 4.5 rupees barrier, nobody is going to buy that power. And we have seen that on the solar side, on the onshore wind side. Whenever the prices have gone up, there have been no buyers, and projects don't take off. The agreements don't get signed. Capital doesn't come in. So the power sector, apart from being a very highly regulated sector, is also extremely price sensitive. And I think that's the biggest challenge that offshore wind needs to face, given the constraints on the resource that we have in these two theaters of Gujarat and of Tamil Nadu.
And while we're on the note of technology, I mean, we're seeing investment into R&D for the first time. We're also seeing a massive growth in solar module manufacturing capacity in India. And going back 3 years, almost all of the modules that large developers source were primarily from China, given the quality and the pricing. What is your views on the newer technologies that's coming up, the commercialization of these new technologies, as well as on the quality of solar modules that we're now producing in India?
You would want me to take it or somebody else in the panel?
I would love your view. I have something specific to ask Mr. Vishu Vishal next. Yes.
I think in terms of technology, we have a choice now in terms of what developers want to deploy. Apart from the core PV technologies, we have thin film that's now available, and which appeal of thin film is definitely much higher in high humidity environments and high temperature environments, because it does perform better. It also has a lower degradation year on year compared to TopCon. TopCon also has its own advantages. TopCon has higher efficiency. It is the technology of the day. HJT is catching up in terms of the price points at which it can compete with TopCon. That's another thing that is on the horizon, which we believe that that kind of a cusp or an inflection point where HJT becomes affordable and becomes the sort of the technology for large-scale deployment. Perovskites, I believe, are some distance away. It is still not come out of the labs. Or commercial implementation of perovskites is still some distance away, though there has been much talk about it. But this also has to be viewed in the context of the supply glut that we have. So if you look at the worldwide capacity additions of solar in the last calendar year, it's been about 765 gigawatts.
Right.
We're just doing about 2 gigawatts per day globally in terms of installations. If you look at the capacity, as of end December, when the year just got over, the solar capacity of all forms of technology was around a terawatt. In the next 1 year, a terawatt more is going to get added to that capacity. China, of course, brings in the most of that capacity. So you have a 2 terawatt capacity that has been built up with just probably around 800 gigawatts of annual installs. That's the gap between, that's the supply overhang we have between supply and demand. Now, what this means for pricing and availability is a matter of conjecture, but I believe that given the kind of supply overhang that we have, the ability to experiment with other technologies other than the core TopCon PV technology is going to be very, very less, unless it comes at a price point which can beat that kind of implication for a supply glut on pricing. That is a big challenge for other technologies to come and compete with the core TopCon technology. But that's the view I have. That supply glut is something that will have a direct bearing on appeal of other technologies.
Wow, that's actually a very wonderful way to look at it. And yeah, never hadn't thought of it that way. Thank you so much for sharing that view with us. I have a question for you, Mr. Vishu Vishal. So in particular, we're seeing massive investments in distribution networks, and as when I was saying, we are in a position wherein because of the lower pricing, we have certain resource-rich areas which have extremely high solar deployment, and we have certain areas such as East India, which does not have a comparable deployment of solar. So given this, I mean, what does the infrastructure investments into distribution look like? And what are the challenges for the government to solve, and how is this going to evolve over the next few years?
See, the most important problem and the biggest problem of the power sector is distribution system efficiency. And we have been grappling with this problem, and this has even escalated with the recent politicization of power, of giving free power and all those subsidies in place. Now, to reform distribution system, what has been done in the past, in the recent past, was RDSS scheme. So I believe RDS scheme allocated almost 3 lakh crore of budget to reform distribution system way back in FY22, and that amount was mainly directed towards improving the distribution network, and line portion of that was allocated towards installation of smart meters. Now,
Right.
installation of smart meters are happening at feeder level, DT level, and consumer level.
Correct.
Out of 23 crores of sanctioned smart meters, till date, only 3 crores have been installed, combined across all the three levels. So as a matter of fact, the progress has been a bit slow, because RDSS scheme was supposed to be, completed by FY25. The target was we will reduce AT&C losses to 12 to 15% by FY25, and we will achieve zero ACS AR gap by FY25 as well. And installation of smart meters was an important enabler to achieve that, because that actually helps you to improve your billing and collection efficiency, which in turn affects the AT&C and overall discom viability. But I believe that there's a lot of activity needs to be done in terms of consumer awareness. We have found that in some states there are some misconceptions regarding smart meters, that it increases the consumer bills. So I think that in that front we need to do some activity, empower consumers and make them understand about the benefits of smart meter and larger requirement. So most of the capex, I believe, would go towards this, discom modernization, and we have a long way to go. We have to finish that, installation very soon, because the larger problem is because in the as we are discussing the impact of solar in the ecosystem. So you have rightly pointed that 20,000, I believe 20,000 crore has been allocated to PM Surya Ghar Yojana, and the entire scheme aims to have 30 gigawatt of installed capacity under this scheme, with almost 10 gigawatt expected in FY26 itself. Now, if you add so much of solar capacity behind the meter, as a distribution system, I am in a very tough position to manage the entire distribution network, because I need to know what's going on behind the meter. And if I don't know, how would I manage the load and demand with the increasing variability in supply and changing demand pattern? That would be challenge. Now, how do we solve that? We solve this through smart meter installation, because that smart meter would give discom enough data that how much of generation is going to be behind the meter, and what is the consumer demand pattern. If I have both these data, then I would be in a better position to do power procurement planning, both in the short term and long term.
No,
And
sorry to pause you there. I've
Yeah.
always thought that a bulk of this Surya Ghar Yojana capacity is actually net metered. So the discom would have a visibility of what capacity is coming, and at any point of time what capacity is getting injected. Why do you say that it's mostly behind the meter? Is it something which we are missing?
No, I'm saying that even for net metering kind of system, we need to have proper, data coming to discom, real-time data, I would call it. So we need to have a real-time data availability with discom.
So you're
To
basically saying a smart net metering is what.
Yes. So we need to move and migrate towards smart net metering, and I'm very sure this net metering thing is not a long-term thing. ultimately it would translate into TOD based net metering, because see, ultimately net metering is about subsidy, in one sense, that you are giving me solar energy at let's say 2.4 or 2.5, and you are setting off with the energy which is available at much higher price during non-solar hours. So today or tomorrow, this net metering thing also would need some kind of revamping in terms of commercial sense. And smart metering, real-time data inflow with the discom would be crucial to enable a lot of solar rooftop addition. This would also translate towards new kind of innovations in terms of peer-to-peer trading, wherein there would be surplus and deficit being exchanged at distribution level itself, between a prosumer and a consumer or a industry. So that's where I think a lot of value would lie going forward, and it would even incentivize people to install more solar capacity going beyond their need. Uh, so I believe a lot of investment in distribution would be required. And another important area is building the smart analytics system at discom level, both in terms of visibility of demand supply, demand forecasting accuracy, and supply forecasting accuracy would be crucial, because as you increase solar in the grid, currently we have almost 7% of solar being 7% of demand, contest demand being met through solar. But as we achieve 280 gigawatt of solar capacity by 2030, the variability in supply would be immense. So at that point in time, to manage the discoms, to manage the grid operation and grid security, I would need a lot of AI ML based forecasting solutions and accuracy in terms of generation forecasting and demand forecasting. So all these smart grid in ecosystem at discom needs to be there. Then going forward, we even need to transition from a simple discom model to DSO model, wherein the network operation and the power services needs to be unbundled, so that there would be a more efficiency element brought into that. But that would require a lot of policy and regulatory reforms. We need to see how it goes. But to answer your question, discom modernization is something very crucial, both in terms of overall viability of the sector to embrace this energy transition, and also facilitate large scale addition of distributed solar within the distribution network.
Wow, thank you. I have so many questions to what you just said. I will ask you a few of them. You can address them in the order that you see fit. Firstly, we are beginning to see this already, right? We're beginning to see a inverted duck curve for a broad energy consumption, and this is becoming a very, near-term problem. This is not something that will happen, that will become a problem in 2030s. But with solar, especially becoming as prominent as it is, especially for directly at the consumer side, this is becoming a very realistic problem. Now, how can we solve this in the near term? Is this also evenly solvable in the near term? And I mean, other than any, other than deployment of large scale battery backed systems and battery backed energy storage, is this really solvable in the near term?
See, it's a very, very important question and very fundamental thing. But there's a catch. Unlike the developed economies, if you name CAISO market in US or South Australia, where the duck curve is very immense, and we are seeing almost zero net load. Net load implies total load minus RE generation. In India, the story is different. Till date, we are seeing that the peak demand that we are experiencing is not in the evening. It is actually coming in the afternoon during solar hours. Sometimes we have peak at 2 p.m. Sometimes we have peak at 3 p.m. Now, why this has happened? Over the last 5-6 years, there has been immense load shifting, especially from agricultural states like Karnataka, Gujarat, and so on, MP. So a lot of agricultural load shifting has actually added the demand at a faster rate during solar hours, which has essentially helped us to absorb more, solar capacity. So that's one important advantage as a nation we have, that we have something to shift, which probably they don't have, in that sense. As a matter of fact, we have 158 gigawatt of grid connected agricultural pumps, and though not all of them operate at the same time, but there's a seasonality element into it. And gradually we are seeing that states are shifting the agricultural demand either through PM Kusum scheme or either bringing that to solar art to absorb more solar. So that kind of duck curve impact I am not seeing right now. In fact, we have another 40 odd gigawatt of agricultural demand that will get shifted over next 4 or 5 years. So till 2032, we have a good amount of room available to absorb more solar. And at the same time, once we reach 2030 and we exhaust that low hanging fruit solar part, I believe that implementation of time of the day tariff would get gain traction. We are seeing that in the recent MSEDCL proposal, wherein they have increased the TOD gap between solar and non-solar hour to incentivize people to use more electricity during solar hours. So that would get implemented across India by all states, and there would be a very good amount of incentive, lucrative incentive for you to shift your consumption to the extent possible during solar hour. That would give us additional demand to absorb solar and keep that net load going zero in abeyance. Further, we are also seeing that the battery storage cost is coming down. In China, probably we are getting information that the system level base cost for 2 hour storage is below $100 now. So probably with this thing coming into play, the battery will also make a lot of sense. And today, at exchange, the gap between solar hour pricing and non-solar hour pricing is around 6-7 rupees. Now, even for a 2 hour battery, at LCOS level, that would make sense with the kind of capex decline that we have seen right now. And the battery would come into play to levelize that arbitrage available in the market. So we have a lot of room available. Plus, do not forget, we are a growing country. Our demand itself is growing at 6% plus. To achieve a developed nation status by 2047, we need to grow at 6%. So we have a fair assumption that 5+% growth would anyway be there. So at that kind of demand growth, that kind of agricultural load shifting, TOD and battery storage and pump storage into play, the kind of duck curve impact that you have seen in developed economies, it's not going to be there in near future. I believe that till 2035 we have enough room to add a lot of solar into the grid.
Absolutely. In fact, just to
To
add
add
to
one point,
yes,
Yeah, please.
sorry, Swapnil, not being able to hear you.
Not able to hear you, sir.
We should file a petition for Wi-Fi on Vande Bharat now that we have it in Air India. It should be the item on the agenda.
What the eloquent case that Vishu has made, I think we fail to understand the concept of value deflation when it comes to solar. Every additional unit of solar power that you put into the grid has lesser value than the previous electron you put into the grid. Okay. So we lost sight of this when you began with fixed tariff PPAs and then same rate per rupees per kilowatt hour for 20 years because the penetration levels were very small. And as Vishu clearly points out, the Maharashtra tariff submission is very, very clear. They're saying that during solar hours, your price is going to be about 2.5 rupees less than what the baseline price is.
Yeah.
The evening peak and the morning peak, it goes up by 1 rupee or 1.5 rupee above the morning. This is the first time you've been able to price that value deflation and then capture it in the form of a price signal. We also have to realize that intermittency and the duck curve is a feature of solar. It's not a bug. Okay.
Right.
We suddenly realize that, there's no sun in the night, but then the fact doesn't remain. It's not the fault of solar, right?
Of course.
Yeah. So the solution is twofold. I mean, he talked about battery storage, valid point. Battery prices coming down offers a great incentive to actually compensate this intermittency and get a firm profile on the load side. But I still think that we have barely scratched the surface in terms of demand response. Price signals are one great way of doing it, but I think we have to move to a dynamic kind of doing this, just like we used to have it in the early days when you used to have high price for ISD calls during some hours, some other hours. But it's time that there's a case for actually dynamic pricing of power by the time of day.
In fact, Vinay, just to echo your point, we have been advocating at various forums at ministry also that why we should not link the solar hour price and evening hour price with the exchange price. Now, you mentioned about the dynamic pricing. That would be a best possible, because I'll just give one example. In GB, in UK electricity market, they have this kind of dynamic demand response in place, wherein you respond to the prices in the wholesale market, and on an hour ahead basis you can correct your demand and supply and take advantage. So I think even Maharashtra has done commendable job. Definitely we should recognize. But even going beyond that, let's have a dynamic price, and because seasonality will have impact on the solar availability, and from one season to another, even with fixed TOD, that may not actually help after a certain point in time. If we move to a dynamic system linked with the exchange price, that would give a lot of signal to both C&I consumer and domestic, if they are very proactive, I would say, in terms of changing their consumption pattern. That would really help us. Earlier we used to say that demand follows generation. Uh, you know, s- uh, but now we have to think other way, because I think the other way around. So earlier when we used to have thermal era, so the generation was following the demand, because you can ramp up, ramp down thermal at your ease. The generation is controllable. Now we
Right.
are entering into era where generation is not controllable. So what we need to do, we have to align our demand in line with the generation that we are expecting. So with that thing in mind, TOD and demand response is something we have not at all harnessed. Demand response regulations are there in place in almost all the states, but discoms barely have any incentive to implement demand response. Because it's a pass through regime. Whatever power demand you have, you put up more distribution transformer, you enter into more PPA, and actually that everything is a part of ROE for a distribution system. So they do not have much of an incentive to implement demand response, and this is something that is a part of larger regulatory reform that we should have.
Well, wonderful. In fact, if you see the entire all of battery energy storage tenders in the country that have come up, they've come up only after the budget incentivized battery storage, and today the cost of battery storage has actually fallen down below, 5 rupees definitely, but closer to early fours. So that, in my opinion, is a very fundamental shift. And now we are looking at a future wherein a completely demand responsive grid is not just practically I mean, it's not just viable, but it is the practical requirement of the time.
Yes.
Now, I want to actually just touch upon something that we've not addressed at all, which is to do the synergy between solar power and green hydrogen. Now, green hydrogen is something wherein we're making massive investments as a country, and I think it is we don't want to meet up. Yes, we don't want to miss the a leadership position in this new emerging industry. Now, in light with what we've discussed, right? What are the synergies that that you see in terms of solar and green hydrogen generation, and how do you see the new incentives for green hydrogen boosting the development of green hydrogen moving forward?
Take that, Vishu.
See, Harshit, I will be honest. I am not fascinated with green hydrogen concept for various reasons.
Right.
I know. See, let me give you some number. Uh, though we are in the race of green hydrogen, but we have to appreciate the fact that India's total emission is almost 3,000 billion tons, or 3 gigatons.
Right.
5 million ton of replacement of gray hydrogen with green hydrogen will eliminate 50 million tons of carbon emission.
Right.
So even by making 5 million ton gray hydrogen green, we are reducing our emission by 2%. Now, with all these efforts, does it make sense right now for a country like India to invest so much and just address 2% of emission? The most important aspect of implementing green hydrogen right now is emission reduction, because if you talk about the other applications of green hydrogen, For example, using it as a fuel in electric buses, or through hydrogen fuel cell, or using it as a storage. That would not make commercial sense, because in the entire value cycle of producing green hydrogen, charging fuel cell, and then discharging, almost 70-80% of energy is lost. So that would not make commercial sense. And almost 6 million ton is the total green hydrogen consumption India has right now. Out of that, 80% is contributed by fertilizer and petroleum and refinery, right?
Right.
We are focusing on electric vehicles, that would anyway reduce the dependence on refineries. So, A, do we need to put so much of pressure on refineries to adopt green hydrogen, or do we need to put so much of pressure on transportation to make it electric? That would be a debatable point. And look at the cost of green hydrogen. Today, the cost of gray hydrogen is around 1.5 to $2 per kg. The cost of green hydrogen just at the point of electrolyzer is four to $4.5. So there is a good amount of $2 per kg of gap in the price of hydrogen production. Even with so many incentives being rolled out by different states for green hydrogen, I do not believe that this $2 gap is going to come anytime soon. And one important factor you have to appreciate, that we are producing gray hydrogen from natural gas. So the cost of natural gas directly impacts the cost of gray hydrogen. Today, the
Right.
cost of natural gas is around 10 to 12 or $14 per MMBTU. Now, with 40% of increased liquefaction capacities which are being commissioned in Russia, Europe, and world over, there is a strong reason to believe that the cost of imported gas uh, should come down to $8 to $10 in next 2 years. Now, if that happens, the cost of gray hydrogen is further going to go down, maybe less than $1. So how do you bridge that gap of $3 with green hydrogen? And believe me, incentives, viability gap, everything does not really kicks in, does not act as a scaling element until the commercial makes sense. We may be talking about net zero and all, but ultimately it's all about the
Absolutely.
commercial sense. So there's
Yeah.
a huge gap between cost of gray hydrogen, cost of green hydrogen as of today, and even the need to address this green hydrogen right now is, to me, debatable, because as I said, the green hydrogen impact is just 2% of India's total emission. What we should really address is power sector, because power sector contributes to 40%, 35 to 40%
Absolutely.
of India's total emission. That's more than 1000 million ton. Let's first make our power system green to the extent possible, so that you reduce the grid emission factor. Once you reduce the green emission factor, you can even use certain amount of power from grid for green hydrogen production, because do not because we must appreciate that green hydrogen needs stable power, renewable plus battery and everything, because you will compromise on electrolyzer efficiency if the power is not stable. So if you add everything, the cost of solar plus battery plus state transmission charges and so on and so forth, because you want to take the advantage of banking, and it has to be at the consumer point of consumption. Transportation of green hydrogen is very difficult. So you will land up in producing costlier green hydrogen as of today. So to sum it all, it's a very debatable subject. But for me, the commercial viability and the need of addressing green hydrogen at this point in time looks difficult. So maybe after 2035, when we have enough solar in the grid, as Vinay was saying, when the cost of one additional electron from solar is dirt cheap, maybe by 2035, 40, 10 paisa or 40 paisa, 50 paisa, then maybe we can use surplus or kind of free, near to free solar energy to produce green hydrogen, and the viability may make sense.
Wow, that does seem very interesting. Now we're already over time, so I'll just ask our last questions from our panelists. So from you, Vinay, I'd love to understand your views in terms of the growth of nuclear energy in the country. Now that's something that the significance of it is something that I personally missed out on, and thank you for bringing that to my attention. Please do share your views on how you see the nuclear sector growing in the near term.
I'm not an expert, but then from what little I have known and the little I have understood from people who have done this for 20, 30 years, is that uh, there are issues. I mean, there is no doubt that you have a technology issue, technology transfer issues. Uh, access to fuel, access to technologies, all that remains as problems. But principally, I think the biggest stumbling block as to why we're not being able to scale up atomic energy and nuclear energy in our country, in India, is because it has been a restricted space. It has been the domain of DAE, it has been the domain of the government, and the single most determinant of our ability to scale up is to de-license that and then allow the private sector to enter it. Okay? I think that's the first step. And typically, it has taken us between 10 to 12 years to set up a single nuclear energy plant. Even without the benefits of scalability and the whole idea of modularization adding to scalability, simple legislative reforms like allowing the private sector, even with the existing designs or even with the legacy designs, if we are able to bring down the project commissioning time from 10 to 12 years to 3 to 4 years, I think that will be a great enabler for scaling up. Now, SMR is something that is some distance away. I think it's like a chimera or a pot of gold at the end of the rainbow. But even if you're able to get some basic things right, you have the technology. If you're able to get great project management skills, give comfort to investors on civil liabilities that come out of mishandling of operational safety mechanisms in nuclear plants. If that's something that can be done and you're able to make it bankable and investable, capital will come in, and better project management skills can reduce cycle times for actually building this, and these two will help scale up capacities. And MR, of course, is the layer on top of it. If you are able to standardize designs and if you're able to get modular designs out, it will be the icing on the cake. That's how I'll do it.
Right. Thank you so much. That's actually a very interesting note. Just to bring it to perspective, right now, India is actually not in the top 20 countries for nuclear funding. So that is a very, I mean, of course, this directly feeds into the point that when I was making, highly regulated sector, there's practically no private sector in the space. But yes, this is probably one of those industries that we've yet not at all allowed for private space. Now, Swapnil, glad to have you back. Would love to know, your parting thoughts on the year ahead for residential space. How do you see this space now evolving over in the near term?
So let's say like last year, 2024 was a setup phase. The PM Surya Ghar was settling down, and we will close this year at around 1 million rooftop solar, residential solar installations. In 2025, we'll see 3x growth. Because now the manufacturing is in place, the distribution in place. There are a lot of newcomers who have in. So by 33 million installations in 25, close to 5 million. Yeah, some which is which that closer because what driving the both in the residential segment. Am I out to you, Harshit?
Partly, we're losing you here and there.
Harshit?
You can turn off your camera. I think that will help you save some time.
Third point. Yeah. So I hope I have answered it in a very shorter manner that set the financial issues who are there to
Sorry, Swapnil, we're not being able to hear you. I think what Swapnil is trying to say that there is a huge financial incentive now with an increased financial incentive with manufacturing coming in the country additionally that is seeing a long-term growth by the government. As you point out, 3x growth in the number of residential solar projects. Now, I think the residential solar is a very distributed market in the country. You have clear-cut leaders in specific pockets, but very few national level players. So yes, and I definitely personally do believe that there's a whole universe of the parts of the country where residential solar is extremely low. So the deployment of solar there would be very interesting to see in the years ahead. Mr. Vishal, last question for you. Now we are seeing, a lot of the growth of green corridors and the growth of solar parks. We've seen that that solar is the cheapest form of electricity, and a larger interest by CNI players to shift to solar with this. So how do you? I mean, what is your feedback on this trend? This trend is here to stay at least. That's what it would seem like today. What is your views on the growth of solar parks and the growth of solar corridors in the country in the future?
See, definitely it makes sense for C&I consumers, a lot of sense I would call it, because see, the grid tariff is almost 7 to 8 rupees, and in some cases 9, 10 rupees. When you enter into solar PPA either through third party or captive, that essentially is a cost saving. And whether you talk about Indian context or global context, there is a lot of pressure on C&I consumers to reduce their emission intensity in whatever product and services they are operating into. In India also we have a carbon credit trading scheme is going to be in place, which will bring in all energy intensive sectors within its ambit, starting from 2 3 sectors, which is going to get announced next year. And from a global perspective, for those industries which are exporting outside India, we have climate taxes kind of things in place. For example, CBAM. So there is clearly a need for C&I consumers, both in terms of making their product or services green by using solar, and of course it makes commercial sense even after adding so many charges and losses which is applicable. There is a clear saving with respect to discount tariff right now. So we are seeing a lot of traction, especially in different models, whether you call it captive solar model, group captive model, or third party open access, or even virtual PPA. Yesterday only we saw a lot of announcement from Amazon entering into solar or renewable PPA to make their facilities green in India. We are seeing a lot of VPPA requirement from data centers because they have a huge compelling requirement to keep their operations green. So we feel that going forward from data centers, from energy intensive sectors, steel, cement, and whatnot, we will have a lot of addition of captive or group captive or third party open access. What we also are seeing in green markets at IEX, that last year the GDAM volume was around the cell volume that we had in green market was around 4.6 BUs overall in FY24. In FY25 till date, we have received almost 11 BUs of cell volume, and the cleared volume in FY25 has increased by almost 200%. So there has been huge increase in cleared volume. Cleared volume in FY25 is around 7.3 BUs till January, and we have 2 more months to account for. So clearly, we are seeing that there's a huge increase in supply volume in green market, as well as there's a huge increase in demand volume in the green market from all large C&I consumers. Wherever there is feasibility, there are challenges in terms of open access charges and losses, which prohibits people, especially industries, to buy from green market from all the states. But from states where it makes sense, for example, UP and Tamil Nadu, we are seeing a lot of industries participating in the green market. So I believe that from industrial segment, since they account for more than 50% of India's consumption, around 500-600 billion units, we have a long way to make them green. And all forms of solutions will work, whether it is a captive model or exchange model or virtual PPA. So we have a very huge potential to add renewable capacities for these C&I consumers.
Absolutely. In fact, this is something I think open access is sheer, just in the sheer number of megawatts deployed in distributed solar has been one of the leading growth drivers for the space over the last few years. Now, before we hand off, last question, and please feel free to jump and add your views, all of you. What, in your opinion, is now required to be done for India to hit its 2030 goals of 500 gigawatts? We had set a goal of 40 gigawatt by 2022. The country missed it by a huge mile. But now we've set an even more ambitious goal of 500 gigawatt of total solar by 2030. What is required to be done for us to actually hit that goal this time? Please, anyone who wants to share their views.
Okay, just repeat the question. I couldn't get it.
What is required to be done for India to achieve its 2030 goal of 500 gigawatt of renewable capacity deployed?
Yeah, I think there are 2 or 3 key things that we can do. On the solar front, I think it's attention to ease of access to land and connectivity will be a very big enabler. Making sure that the availability of transmission capacity is in line with the 50 gigawatts of tendering that you're doing is the second biggest determinant of whether we can attain that number or not. Because solar plants that get built in 12 to 18 months, transmission line takes 2 to 3 years. So there's a big gap in the ability of the system to keep pace with the ability or the scale up of capacity on the solar side. On the wind front, I think there's a great need to for policy support to broaden the availability of suppliers, develop the supplier ecosystem, and make sure that wind gets the pricing that it deserves and the value attached to the grid. I don't think we have been able to achieve that with the current paradigm that we have. Wind needs to be priced for what value it brings to the grid, and that's the second enabler for wind. Battery storage is enough being done. If the price is falling, there's a need to recognize it as a resource from a grid point of view. And ancillary markets will be a big determinant of whether battery storage really takes off in the true sense of the term. These will be my 3 key.
Interesting. In fact, yeah, I think wind, ever since solar prices have fallen so much, I think people have really stopped valuing. I mean, as you said, give wind the value that it brings to the grid because it is the only form of renewables that can actually add a little bit of that baseload demand. So yeah, I think that's really well put and absolutely right. Give wind the value it deserves. That's definitely required for India to hit that 500 gigawatt milestone. Definitely. Thank you. Mr. Vishu Vishal, over to you, sir.
So I believe apart from operational, obviously we are aware that these are the challenges, land, connectivity and all those things, transmission planning that is affecting the addition. But I also believe that we have to solve the part of projects being bid out, PPA, PSA not getting closed. The most important problem that I feel in PPA, PSA closure is DISCOM's expectation that is it the correct price? Now, when there is a plain solar tender, DISCOMs often say that we do not need plain solar tender, we need hybrid. But when there is a hybrid and or RTC or FDI tender, the cost comes higher and they are reluctant to sign it. So I believe that there has to be something worked out at SECI's level or REIS level, wherein they take some kind of assurance or undertaking from the DISCOM, in terms of what was the demand and what is the expected price range they're willing to sign in PPA. Because even though 50 gigawatt is getting tendered bid out, the success rate in terms of PPA PSA closure is very less. I think if I'm not wrong, 10-12 gigawatt is just getting PPA PSA closed, and that is actually good translate into the actual capacities that is getting constructed. So we have to solve that part, how much capacity you are bidding and how much actually getting PPA PSA materialized. Because after PPA PSA, the problem that Vinayji has highlighted will be on top of that. The connectivity, transmission, land acquisition, and all those things will be there. So we need to have a larger portion of PPA PSA getting close to reach even close to that. So I believe that even if we are able to achieve 25 gigawatt of yearly actual capacity addition, COD getting done, that also would be I believe a good success rate. I honestly believe that 50 gigawatt of addition each year would be very tough, the kind of structure we operate in and so many problems we are facing right now. So addressing the part at REI's end, And there has to be some kind of framework being worked out, because similar tenders are being floated in different REIAs. Discoms evaluate what is the price and then decide whether to sign PPA, PSA or not, and things gets delayed. We are seeing even tenders having backlog of more than 1 year or 1.5 years, and then entering into PPA, PSA closure rate. And that's why you have seen the battery storage tenders getting disapproved by regulator because of delays and market prices getting corrected in that time frame. So a lot of issues both at the top level in terms of ensuring PPA, PSA and discoms meeting their resource adequacy target set by the CEA, that also needs to be enforced upon through state regulators. And at the same time, the operational challenges would be a key thing to watch. I expect that going forward, the plain solar tender would be very less. The ask from Discom is very clear that we need some form of storage element into it. And as Vinayji pointed about the transmission issue, the transmission issue is already very clear that the transmission cost is increasing because the transmission utilization percentage is not that high. So for that, there's likely going to be a mandate that whenever there is a renewable capacity being bid out, there has to be a certain amount of storage element into it, let's say 30%, 10%, 20%, so that the transmission utilization is increased. The connectivity for a solar project will not be available for non-solar hour. That connectivity will be will be available for someone who can utilize that substation or that connectivity during non-solar hours, so that the connectivity the transmission utilization could be more, and overall the cost of transmission at country level can be brought down. So all those things needs to be solved, and even if we are able to, I think, achieve 25-30 odd gigawatt of actual commissioning per year, I think that also would be a good success rate.
Wow. Yeah, thank you so much. That was actually very insightful. Now we're over 20 minutes short up on time. So unfortunately, we'll not be able to do any audience Q&A. I have tried and address as many questions from Slido that I could. So I'd like to thank all our three panelists for their time today and for their insights. It was absolutely revelational, a few aspects of what was discussed today. And yeah, I would personally, please do expect me reaching out with doubts on a few of the points that was discussed. But yeah, thank you so much for your time and your insights. It was wonderful having you here. And thank you to all our viewers today who joined for this webinar. And I hope you found it insightful for in your own context. So thank you once again, everyone, and looking forward to a very sustainable energy year ahead. Thank you.
Thank you, Harshit.
Thank you.